The pre-industrial era started in 1750. This era was between American colonies in the North and the South. The North and the South had different lifestyles, labor force, jobs and occupations, and governance. Some jobs and occupations in the North were whaling, shipbuilding, trade, craftsmen, fishermen, and timber cutters. In the South, it was agriculture, and they got their money from cash crops. In the North, people lived in towns around the local church. In the South, people lived on plantations. The work in the South was plantation owners who had indentured servants, specifically African Americans. The way some work was done in the North was craftsmen who had a one-person shop. That one person produced all the goods for the town. There are many of these shops around the town. There was blacksmiths and shoemakers and many more. The Northerners had town meetings, usually in the local church, and had roots of democracy, which means everyone, the men at the time, had a right to vote. The Southerners didn't have a democracy, and only the planter elite had political power, so the African Americans had no say. After this era started the Industrial Era. The Industrial Era started around 1790. There were so many great inventions from the Industrial Era, and some of them were railroads, steamboats, the telegraph, things to make farming easier so people can work in factories such as the steel plow, the cotton gin, and the light bulb. Factories started to come along, and individually owned shops started to disappear. Many people started to work in the factories and were leaving the farms because of all the new farm technology. But the working lives and conditions were very bad. The workers in the factories had poor working conditions such as bad air, no light, always too hot or cold, noisy and very dangerous machines. The workers had to work long hours and got a low pay. They were treated like machines and had poor medical care. The workers had to live in the factory housing that was poorly taken care of and had a high rent that most workers had trouble paying. Workers formed unions and went on strike because of the poor living and working conditions. Workers that were part of a union were put on blacklists, which were lists of troublemakers, and once an employee is put on one, they won't be hired anywhere else. When people got fired, scabs were hired. Those were replacement workers, and usually they were immigrants. Old immigration was during the 1830s to the 1880s. Immigrants came from Western Europe, and the reason why they came was crop failure and poverty. The Irish settled in eastern cities, Germans settled in the Midwest, and Chinese settled in California. Some of the problems they faced in America was nativism, religious discrimination, and they were accused of taking jobs. New immigration was during the 1880s to the 1920s. Immigrants came from Eastern and Central Europe and Southern Europe, and the reasons why they came was poverty, religious persecution, and political persecution. They settled in cities and ethnic neighborhoods. Some of the problems they faced in America was nativism, organized resistance, and they were blamed for social problems. There was some big business during the Industrial Era, and a couple big ones were run by Rockefeller and Carnegie. Rockefeller owned the Standard Oil Company. He horizontally and vertically integrated in a few ways. The ways he horizontally integrated was he bought out his competition and got rebates from railroads and inside info on small businesses. He vertically integrated by buying oil fields and drilling for oil, owned tankers, railroads and delivery wagons, and he sold cooking stoves that ran on oil. Carnegie owned a steel company. He also horizontally and vertically integrated in a few ways. He horizontally integrated by forming a corporation, and he hired tech experts to research and develop a way to lower his price. The ways he vertically integrated was he bought iron ore deposits and coal deposits, owned ships and railroads, and sold products made of steel. Another big thing during the Industrial Era was a thing called social Darwinism, and that is the belief that all people are in a competition. The winners are the ones who have the most wealth and are the strongest and most fit. A big thing during the Industrial Era also was a thing called urbanization. It is the growth of cities. People started moving to urban areas and leaving rural areas. This led to poor sanitation and poor living conditions in the cities. The Industrial Era was named the Gilded Age. That name is meant to show that America was good on the inside and poor on the inside. The way America was good on the outside was its great wealth, and the way it was poor on the inside was its widespread poverty. After this era is the Post-Industrial Era. The Post-Industrial Era started in the 1920s. Business techniques started to improve, assembly lines were created, advertisements were used a lot, and there was installment plans and payment plans. There was newer technology like laptops and computers, cell phones, and the internet. Automobiles got more advanced and changed American business, and geography. There was road construction industries that benefited because of automobiles. Highways were built, and people were able to live farther away from work. Workers' lives started to improve. They got higher wages and lower work hours. They had free weekends that allowed them leisure time. More jobs were created because of roads and automobiles, and workers got more money to invest, and managers are hired and needed. There was economic changes by the end of the 20th century that had a big impact on life today. There was a growth in high-tech service jobs, temporary jobs, and service sector jobs. Factory and business jobs changed a lot too. Factory jobs went overseas, and there's globalization of business. During the 1950s, families were on one-wage earner families, and that changed within a few decades. Now there's more two-wage earner families. There are still many changes going on today.